super cool episode.
Dude, I'm like coming down from it right now.
You got a big surprise there at the end of that thing.
That ending was the best surprise one could ever ask for. I'm like, my wheels are turning way too fast right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, we had a fantastic guest today. We had Daniel Horne. For those of you who are not familiar with his work, look him up right now. I'll wait. Good, you're back. All right, so Daniel Horne, he has done fantasy illustration, classic monster movie paintings,
A ridiculous number of book covers, children's
books. It's his volume of work is outstanding.
Doing this podcast, I had no idea I was going to be sitting amongst geniuses, amongst kings, and yet here we are, episode 2, season 2, and I couldn't be happier with that last interview, my man.
It's an excellent time. Everybody buckle up, and here we go. Episode 2, Sam.
Is it already episode 2?
I know, season 2, episode 2.
We made it this far.
It was a tale long remembered.
They said it couldn't be done.
We did it.
We keep on doing it. And this week, man,
we've got a very special guest with us today.
A dude who has his own Wikipedia page. I mean, that's leveling up right there.
Yeah, we just hit that next tier here. We have with us the very talented, very generous Daniel Horne.
Hey, welcome,
guys.
brother.
Thanks for inviting me here.
Sam has interviewed you once a long time ago, actually the first year that we did this with the Dark Art Show. Mm-hmm. We did it as part of Art Club Live. And you don't remember, do you?
I'm so sorry.
I remember. It was a live feed from his studio. So, and since he has been in a couple of our shows here, a couple of Dark Art shows with Grandpa Munster and Ray Walston from My Favorite Martian, and has been very generous with sharing his work with us. And I thought it would be great to get him down here and talk a little bit about his experience and kind of what drives him creatively.
But before that, can I just ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
Did you work with Grandpa Munster? Is that what he was saying?
No.
What?
He did a painting of Grandpa, a portrait of Grandpa Munster.
I only asked this, man, because when I was a kid, my dad took me to meet Macho Man Randy Savage. There's this long line for Macho Man, and then there's this guy to the side, and I go up, and it's obviously I'm talking about Grandpa Munster, and this dude, he was taking silly photos with me. He was talking to me for like an hour. I didn't even know who he was, but he was such a cool dude. And that was my introduction to the Munsters, was literally meeting Grandpa Munster.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm old enough to remember when they were on television the first time.
yeah.
So, they've always been that was one of my first experiences with classic monsters, because, growing up in the 60s, they, when Universal were selling the packages to television for the first time, and you never knew when they were going to be on again. So you'd scour the newspaper, and then you would wait and wait. You'd cut out the ad, like Bride of Frankenstein Friday night at 8:30, and it was an event, because you just never knew if you'd ever see them again.
Oh, wow.
And we had grew up in Pittsburgh, and we had 3 channels, little tiny, probably, I don't know, 9-10 inch black and white television. We didn't have color TV till the early 70s, so it was like black and white. Everything was black and white. But somehow I just it was Karloff and his portrayal of the Frankenstein creature that that I really like glommed onto, because I felt sorry for him. It wasn't his fault that he was made. It wasn't his fault that people despised him because of how he looked. And he was like an outsider. And when I was a kid, I felt like an outsider too. So that just naturally gravitated towards, the Frankenstein, the Wolfman, not so much of Dracula, but I saw all the classic monsters, even the Mummy, Karloff's Mummy. It was because of the love of this woman, that he came back through the centuries, would look for. So it wasn't like Godzilla, with like a rampaging monster. They were human first, and I sympathized with them, and I just kind of felt like one of them.
Out of all of those old school, would we just call them monsters or horror? Okay. Was there one that was your favorite?
Karloff's Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That hands down. After that, it was probably the Wolfman, but Karloff's Frankenstein was it for me.
Did you see the new Wolfman movie?
I haven't yet.
Are you going to? So you are.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's always tough to go to those movies that are a remake of something you're so passionate about, know? So.
Did you ever find that you, like, before you, I guess, pursued art with friends and whatnot, did you find that you were doodling these creatures and on the side, or were you already involved with drawing by the time you were exposed?
Well, I was already drawing.
Yeah.
I went to Catholic school when I was a kid, and the nuns would call up my mom crying, "How do we get this kid from just to stop drawing?
Really?
We can't get." I would finish tests fast so I can flip it over, and it was a sheet of paper. It wasn't good for my grades, but it was great for my art.
Yeah. And you were drawing stuff back then like you're doing now? You were drawing the monsters back then even?
Yes, but before that, I was drawing things like the crucifixion of Christ, and on one side of the paper, complete with Roman centurions, I think at age 4. And on the other side, it was a pirate ship, which I still have.
No way.
My mother saved it. It was on that old time, like paper that was like rough. That's going to disintegrate soon. But when I was younger, it was I wanted to be a priest when I was very young, and so I was really attached to the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church was my first awakening to art telling a story, because in the cathedral that I was a member of, behind us were the bas-relief Stations of the Cross. And when I was really young, I'm talking kindergarten and preschool, I would sit there and I would look. You could read them without words. And then my mother used to take me to the Carnegie Mellon Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh. And the thing I remember most about that was they had a huge life-size display in glass of a taxidermied camel with a Bedouin on its back. And the camel's they're being attacked by 2 female lions. And the Bedouin is aiming down a musket at this female lion. It's all taxidermied, and this female lion has its claws like buried into the haunches of this camel. And the camel's head's flipped up, his eyes are rolled, his tongue's lolled out, and it's the most famous thing in the Carnegie Mellon Museum. It's 100 years old. They took it down for like 5 years so they could refresh it. Mm-hmm. But every detail, like the saddle, bedrolls, the female lions, you know, one was curled up dead on the ground, and the terror in this Bedouin's eyes as, you know, he's aiming his musket at this other female, and it's like telling stories. Art, it doesn't need words to tell a story, and that's what really sent me on my journey to want to create art that told a story. So that's the you know, how it was when I was really young, you know, and then through you know, we called it junior high back then, but
Yeah.
then high school. I had an art teacher. Well, I had two art teachers. One art teacher was my Uncle Jim. That was my art teacher. Art ran rampant through my family. My older sister's an artist. My Uncle Jim's an artist, and he was my art teacher. My mother was a doll maker. My grandmother was a watercolor. She's from Ukraine. So art was this thing.
Wow.
In different genres.
Were you still going to Catholic school when you went to junior high?
No, because we moved, and so that, like, we moved out to the burbs. I lived in the city, and lived out into the burbs where the church was in a auditorium, well, actually a gymnasium, and I was sitting underneath the basketball hoop, and I thought, oh man, this is not good. You know, to me, I needed the visual stimulation, you know, of things, and I just kind of, well, it kind of, I saw, instead of priesthood, I saw that I could communicate with art, and art was really at the center of who I was and who I am now.
Wow, it's cool that you noticed that at such a young age. Were the teachers, was anyone concerned with you drawing monsters, or was it just drawing in general instead of being studious?
No, I mean, every chance I got, if it had to do a biography, Boris Karloff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I tried to squeeze monsters into everything. You know, whatever I was doing, you know, book reports, you know, movie monsters, you know. I still have my original, like, book that my grandmother bought me. This is probably 71. It was really the first kind of coffee table book about classic monster movies and that. And I still, it's like tattered as all heck. But no, I for every you know, the art show, there was always portraits of Phantom of the Opera or you know,
The timing of this, Don, is so funny because Don knows pretty well that I've seen a few horror movies in my day, and I'm always looking for more. And I recently discovered that I haven't seen too many of the old school monster movies. So recently I saw Frankenstein, which was fantastic. Nosferatu was very, very cool. I don't know if that goes under that genre. But what should I watch, man? I saw I think White Zombie the other day. That was good.
Absolutely. If you want to get the best performances out of Bela Lugosi, see Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein. He plays Igor. It's hands down. He was way better than Dracula. He owns that. And actually, it's said that in the Son of Frankenstein, he just steals it away from Karloff and Basil Rathbone. I mean, he's.
Why? I wonder why more people don't talk about that. Usually, only hear about his Dracula performance.
I never was a big Dracula fan, but an Igor fan. I mean, he was magnificent. He had a broken neck and had this big prosthetic that Jack Pierce made for him, and it like bulged out as if your broken neck would do that, and he would go, you know. And say, hey, you got a broken neck, you know, and he'd pound on it, and someone off stage would be like, you know, it's like he's knocking on wood. It was funny.
So you always inch yourself towards the monsters who kind of had like an inward struggle? Or...
Yes.
Yeah. Now, do you find that there's some, when you approach, like, say, a portrait, especially a portrait, like, is there something that you lean into that, like, oh, this is definitely, this is where the story's coming from? Like, is it the eyes, or is it the, like, a facial expression?
It's always the eyes. I think out of all my portraits, whether it's a straight portrait of a doctor, or classic monster, or a colonial era soldier, it starts with the eyes, because if you can pretty much, with a portrait, you can pretty much be off a little tiny bit, here and there, but if you don't get the person's eyes and their expression, it's done. You've missed it. So it always starts with the eyes. Always. I've been told my paintings, my portraits, it's the eyes that draw people in, and it's just because, like with, the whole thing, the eyes are the
Window to the soul. Yeah.
It's absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Do you think about that too when you create, Don?
Yeah. I mean, everything. So similarly, like, storytelling is all that I've ever wanted to do, right? Whether it be performing or directing or writing or drawing, it's always that. But similarly, like, I approach a lot of my portraits probably from the eyes first, just because it feels like whenever you connect with somebody, you want to make eye contact with them, and that's like anytime that you can capture that glint. And like, I still feel very much in the early learning stages about discovering faces, especially like those, like the difference between a line, like it could be the width of a pencil line that can make the difference between recognizing somebody and not recognizing them. It's very, very subtle differences.
Wow. I'm going to be looking at these pieces differently now, looking right for the eyes.
With painting portraits, there's a difference between painting females and painting males. Painting females is what you don't paint that counts. With painting males, it's what you paint.
Can you explain that to me?
With females, they usually have, I'm talking in general terms,
Sure,
softer faces. So you don't want to paint them harsh with harsh lines or harsh values. It's like painting children. I painted a lot of young adult book covers, but I love painting kids, and it's a real challenge because they have no bone structure in their faces. It's just a mass of very subtle values. And it's sort of the same thing with women. You want to paint them as they appear. With males, you want to paint them with structure. Like the rugged structure. Like you want to paint as it is. Every flaw. If they have if they bumped their chin when they were a kid, or because those things are what makes a male portrait interesting, is the structure of the face. And with a female, it goes with if you're painting a full body, depending on the style you use, you want to, at least I do, I want to paint them as soft or as hard as they are. Soft as the females are, their skin, all the subtleties. I very, very rarely use a strong light when I'm photographing a model, or if someone wants their portrait done, photographing a female. I use a bounce light, so it's very soft, which makes it more difficult to paint. because you're relying on these very subtle changes of value and temperature in their face. But with a male model, you want that kind of light that chisel the face and structure the face. Yeah.
Wow. I've never. Do you think you're better at one than the other? Do you prefer one over the other, or is it just different?
It's just different. I love the challenge of painting females because it's so difficult to get it right. I paint very realistically, and kids, they're, God love them, but they're really difficult to paint because it's like there's no skull in that head. Mm-hmm. It's all like
baby
little
fat, rounding it all out.
Yeah, it's really hard.
So, what most of the work that I know by you is either with oil painting or a digital facsimile to oil mm-hmm. painting. What made you lean towards that as far as a medium's concerned?
What, oils?
Yeah.
When I left high school, I wanted to be, I graduated in 78, not 1878, 1978. I know that was a long time ago, but yeah, we had electricity and all that kind of good stuff.
That's very nice.
Yeah. I wanted to be a stop motion animator because the senior art teacher, Mr. Ralph Langer, he was an assistant. Who's the fellow that did the Night of the Living Dead?
George J. Romero?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, Romero. Yeah.
George Romero, another Pittsburgh guy. Well, he was an assistant on the set to his movies, and he would bring to class a big plastic pickle barrel of like foam latex prostheses that maybe they had an air bubble and it failed and that, and he would show us how to put this stuff on, and he showed us how to do stop motion like puppets. And in my senior piece, I did the biplane fight with King Kong on top of a miniature skyscraper. And when I saw that not only could you draw monsters and paint them, but you can like move them. So I wanted to go to California when I graduated, but it was a little too much of an ask for my parents to, you have to remember, this is before internet, before cell phones, before fax machines, before everything like that. And they just said, nah, we're not going to like drop you off in Hollywood and like say goodbye. So I said, well, okay. And I just picked an art school that was away from home in Pittsburgh, but that close enough. So I picked the York Academy of Arts. See, in high school, junior and senior year, I went half the day to a VOTech and took commercial art. And our instructor had a bulletin board with all these art schools, their pamphlets. And so I just picked, okay, York is just right over, 2.5 hours away. Okay, I'll go there. And because I had lost what I wanted to do, being a stop motion animator, I kind of floundered around. And I was just about to get kicked out of school when they had a new instructor come in. His name was Ken Lager. He was a outdoor life magazine illustrator. He illustrated Western paperback covers. And he said, to his credit, he said, I see something in him. Let me take responsibility for him. Now, this was a first-year teacher. Let me take responsibility for him. I'll see that he does his other assignments, but let him study under me.
So you were going to be kicked out, just poor grades or
non-attendance, not
interested.
I just lost my center.
Yeah, and this guy saw something in you and decided, let me give him a chance.
Yeah, he said, I see something in his work. And he took me under his wing. On weekends, I would study in his studio. And he trained me in what's called the Brandywine tradition. Howard Pyle, the father of American illustration around the turn of the last century, who taught N.C. Wyeth, Andrew Wyeth's father. N.C. Wyeth was the greatest illustrator of his generation. And so I had this direct line of teacher, student, a direct line from Howard Pyle to Ken Lauger to me. And it was all about being truthful in storytelling, being honest with your characters. And to this day, I take Ken Lauger's teaching. It's in my soul now. It's just part of who I am.
For a dummy like me, what do you mean when you say being like true to the character? Were those your words?
Yes.
Okay. What does that mean?
Okay, not using Fabio if it's if it's just a skinny little guy. Not researching the characters, do background. With the character beyond what he or she look like. How do they interact with other characters? How would they react in situations? For instance, I was doing a book cover, and this one character, he had a scar on his lip from a sword fight, and he'd always go like bite on his lip when he got nervous. And so I put that scar on it. I read into the manuscript. I looked for details and kind of idiosyncrasies on what these characters, what they do, other than just they're heroic or evil or whatever. And so, I started my career with the Science Fiction Book Club. Was under a magnificent art director, John Lisco. He was one of those old school art directors who, again, he saw something in my early work when I just graduated art school in 82, I'm sorry. And he said to me, I see something in your work. I'm going to give you things to do, little like their monthly offerings, their pamphlet. They had an illustration on it, and the artwork didn't depend on the sales of anything. So he kind of nursed me on until I got to be a better painter. Like my head was far outstripped my abilities as a painter at the time. So and it got closer and closer and closer. And then the first book I got to illustrate, the cover for, was a J.R.R. Tolkien, two children's stories. And then I did a Doctor Who book
Wait
cover.
a minute. How did you, right out of school, how did you get hooked up with a gig like that? I mean...
I was living in York, Pennsylvania. And after I graduated, I moved. I rented a farmhouse in a little town on the Susquehanna in Lancaster County called Bainbridge. It didn't even have a one stop. I mean, it had a post office and a store, and that was it in one road. It's about 3/4 of a mile long. That was it. There was nothing. It was bordered on cornfields on three sides. And I knew I had to get to New York because that's, again, before internet, before all this stuff, you had to be within striking distance of Manhattan if you wanted to be an illustrator. So what I'd do is I would take a bus to Harrisburg and then take a train to Philadelphia and take another train to Philadelphia to Manhattan. And I was, I was just a poor artist at that time, so I couldn't even photograph my work. So I had to haul around these 24 by 36 quarter-inch pieces of masonite, sometimes 4, 5, even 6 of them, in a portfolio up and down Manhattan, up and down Fifth Avenue, to the publishers. And then I'd have to do it all the way back again. Well, I was able to take some Polaroids of my work, and I sent it to the Science Fiction Book Club, to John Lisco. And he wrote me back and said, okay, why don't you come in, show me your work? So I took the long trek up to Manhattan like that, and then even longer out to way out at the end of Long Island where Garden City is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And, he gave me a bunch of things to do, and it kept me, number one, it kept the rent paid and food, but it kept me wanting to improve. Because I remember the first time I took my portfolio up to New York to the New York publishers, they tore it apart. I mean, but they weren't brutal. They were honest. And they said, oh, this is good, but I'm going to write down all the things that you need to work on. And I had 3 appointments that day, Doubleday, tour, and and Berkeley Books at the time. And each of them said just about the same thing. Well, being, thinking that I was the god of illustration, and these people don't know what they're missing. How can they say these things? And on my way home on those trains, I'm going, and I got home and I burned my portfolio. I said,
Whoa.
They just don't deserve me. I burned out in the backyard. I burned all the paintings. And then about a week later, when my ego kind of healed, I looked at that letter, those notes, and I looked at it honestly, and I said, yeah, I need work. Mm. So, and every time I would go up to New York, the list would get a little bit lower, a little bit lower, a little bit lower, until they gave me work. Mm.
Yeah, and how important was that? That seems like a truly pivotal moment for you to have that self-realization that maybe there was something to their critique of your work, because you could have gone the other way and just been like, screw them. I mean, granted, you did burn your portfolio. That might have been a little extreme, but like if you had just stayed in that spot, like, that career might not have ever manifested.
What would have happened was I would have admitted defeat and went home to Pittsburgh and worked on a dock, although there's nothing wrong with working on a loading dock, and I would have been miserable the rest of my life. But I just felt that this was making stories. Picture stories is what I was meant to do. It overran my wanting to be a Catholic priest, and so it had to be this powerful feeling. So it hurt, because I put all this energy and time into these paintings, and they're being like, I took their critique the wrong way. But thankfully, I didn't tear up those notes, and I held on to them for years after it. After 10 years on, when I was established, and I still looked at those things, saying, no matter how good you are, you always have to keep on getting better, wanting to get better. You can't just sit back and say, I made it. You can't say that. You always have to test yourself. And now I've been at this this is 43 years now, and the act of painting doesn't so much challenge me of painting things. So I have to challenge myself to, all right, how can I show this in a different way? It's more compositional and maybe thought than actually the physical act of painting. Or maybe I'll try, all right, let me try to paint a contemporary portrait. Maybe try using a brilliant color in the background and see how I like that. Like, let me push myself to become better, just to push. And you constantly, you just have to push yourself to be better.
Yeah, I guess the journey never ends with
It
that.
never ends.
I'm so fascinated. I'm going back to what you said before about, deep diving into these characters. Like I've heard that before with like theater. You're taking on a character. You want to find out like how they would act just going to the grocery store. I never thought about that when you're painting a portrait or whatever it is you're painting. That's so fascinating.
Well, that helped me. See, there have been different aspects of my career. I started with the Science Fiction Book Club, and then my wife would give me each year the Artist Market book. I don't know if you remember. It was a phone book of art directors, and you would go down, and they would say what they needed, how much they paid, and I saw an ad for Dragon magazine. I thought, "Ooh, dragons! That sounds cool." I didn't know anything about it, so I put together a portfolio, a fantasy portfolio. I did paintings specifically after I went out and bought some Dragon magazines. Oh, okay, they like monsters and characters, together, and so they bought the first piece, and that was my first Dragon magazine cover. I think I did 6 or 8 of them in total. Over a couple of years, and then I would do a lot of work for TSR with the gaming modules. I never played the game except for the first time I played with my friend Delfino, I guess last fall. I never told anyone I never played, because they would have strung me up. but it was always about the characters and the story. Can these characters defeat this monster? And I would always give them the question, but I'd never give them the answer, which one would win, And I remember this because at the time I would get letters in the mail from 12, 13, 14-year-old, mostly boys, saying, "Gee, Mr. Horne, who did win? I think so-and-so should win." And I kept them. And I kept all these letters, and my wife put it in a book. And she says, whenever you're feeling down about your career, that you're not making any kind of a small difference in the world, just reread those. And I do. Every year since then, I reread them. It shows me where I began, and it keeps me focused on what I want to do.
Dude, I do the same thing with my students' little treasures they give me over the years. I have like a treasure box of stuff from like almost 20 years ago now. Like, that's awesome that you do that. Yeah. So, Don, do you play any, we're talking Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, yeah. You're talking about the gaming, right? Do you ever, I think we've talked about before.
Yeah, I used to play a lot as a kid. Actually, that's how I first became familiar with Dan's work is an issue of Dragon magazine that I picked up as a kid. So I had these friends, especially my friend Eric, who his brother was really into Dungeons and Dragons, and his friend Jonathan was our dungeon master, and we'd get around the pool table and play and stuff. But we'd pick up. There's this little bookshop in the mall across from my house, and we'd pick up these Dragon magazine and Dungeon magazine, and all those kind of things. And at one point, my family had moved into a new house, and I was able to get the basement as my bedroom, and my folks just said, do whatever you want on it. So me and my friend Eric would paint all of these like Dungeons and Dragons characters on the walls, and John Lennon was on the wall at one point. And I found that I had a really deep connection with, I still have a deep connection with a lot of those people from that love of Dungeons and Dragons. What character did you play when you played with Delfino?
A dwarf with a crossbow. Yep.
Is that one of your characters that you made, or
what was your dwarf's name?
I forget. I forget, to be honest with you. I created with Dragon magazine. I created these two characters, two dwarves, and I still do sketches and to this day of them. They're like Abbott and Costello. They always they go on these quests to steal treasure, and they always fail, and they always get caught. And it was my second Dragon magazine cover that they're they try to loot a dragon's hoard, but they're caught by the dragon, and another one for Gygax magazine. Mm-hmm. He was the creator of Dungeons and Dragons. The two guys were there, and this I think it's called an Etten, two-headed kind of giant ogreish guy, was kind of discovered them, and it's like they just can't win. They just can't win. So,
did you know Gary at all?
No,
I never
met him.
I met him once at a science fiction convention. I got him to sign my Unearthed Arcana. This was right after he split from TSR. That's probably the kindest way to say it, but he was working on these historical role-playing adventures and stuff like that. He was one of the nicest guys I ever met. Yeah, very cool. I'm sorry. I'm like diverging in the conversation.
You're doing okay, Don. You're doing all
no,
right, man.
No, I just it's really interesting for me to be able to sit here and chat about this. Like we had a really nice conversation the other day, and it's I'm trying not to hit the same points that we were talking about already, and manufacture a conversation. But it's not very often in people's lives that they get to meet somebody who has, in one way or another, had a fairly profound impact on their interests and their view of storytelling in the world. And to have an opportunity to sit and chat with you, who were one of those people, is... It's still kind of an amazing thing for me, and I don't want to necessarily embarrass you with praise, but it's I really appreciate this, this conversation and this moment in my life that we get to chat like this.
You fanboying over here?
I am a little bit. Is that okay? I mean,
absolutely.
It's not very often you get to do that,
It's my pleasure. Like I said, it's my first podcast, and I'm kind of a homebody. I don't go to conventions, anymore, and so for me to sit with a bunch of guys and talk about art is, that's a really important thing in my life.
How does it feel knowing that these kids or adults are out there using your art and they're creating like stories with them, right? Mm-hmm. And they're battling with them and becoming like almost find like a relationship, I don't know. I've always been fascinated by Dungeons and Dragons, and I've never even played it. I was planning on asking you all about it, but what, you played once, dude?
Yeah, last year.
What was the experience like?
It was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. I think mostly is because until I met my friend Delfino, I didn't know anyone who played. Because I knew I had to get close to New York, but couldn't afford to live in New York, I moved to Philadelphia because it's just a train ride. So I moved, I got an apartment at 15th and Locust, center of Center City. And I met my wife. I was bringing my stuff up in an elevator. I met my wife, or the girl who would become my wife, in an elevator. And she's a big part of my whatever success I have, because she never let me feel sorry for myself. If I came back without any work, she would say, just do another painting. Just, she always encouraged me. She would be there, but she would never let me like fall into like a pity pudding,
Yeah.
Which is really easy to do. I mean, because artists, they just, I mean, they're
Rejection, I guess, right?
Oh, it's horrible. Oh my gosh, it's horrible. I still don't. I mean, I still don't like it, but nowadays it doesn't happen as much as it did. Getting back to the kids, what's really neat is one of those kids grew up, got married, and whose son sent me a letter.
What?
Saying he plays D&D with his dad, and his dad was telling him about how he got, he was, how the artwork was, he said, my dad would pull out, a bunch of these old dusty, stinky magazines, and they played, and that was really neat. The generational,
second generation fan,
it's really
work.
Neat. Yeah,
that is so cool, man. Do you write these people back? Do you?
Every single one.
You do.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you ever get to meet them? I know you said you don't do conventions. Would they meet you at conventions or?
Only once, I think, and it happened in Pittsburgh at a a tiny convention. I was exhibiting some of the covers, and this one, I guess he was about 12 or 13-year-old boy, came up and was telling me about how he liked my art on the cover of the magazine, and he said, I want to be an artist too. He said, how do you do it? How do you become an artist? I said, draw, baby, draw. He said, you just draw.
Yeah.
So before he left, I gave him a painting, and it was an interior piece I did for Dungeon magazine. It was a painting, hoping that maybe that, like whenever he would feel down, he would remember that you just keep at it. You just keep at it, and So, but yeah, that was neat. That was, an early aspect of my work. And then I moved into children's books and illustrated 3 children's books.
Oh.
Circus Mouse, King Midas and the Golden Touch, and Young Merlin through Doubleday. And that's when I really felt that I use all my training in doing these interior illustrations, where it wasn't depending on, you can only use so much of the cover, and all the characters had to look at you, no matter if they were fighting the guy next to them. On the cover, everyone had to look at you. The difference between doing a cover illustration and interior, cover, you're selling the book. It's a sales thing. So the art directors and editors have a little bit more control over, things, I want this guy, to be posed like this. And I don't want him fighting this other character, so it's more art directed. But working with children's books, there's a saying, you let your freak flag fly, and I went in, I rededicated myself to the Brandywine tradition of storytelling. And you could just do that. But we just had, our daughter was just born. This was in 1988. And I had children's books at that time weren't paying very much. My wife taught school in Philadelphia, in the city, for 40 years. She was a music teacher. And I just thought, as a husband and a new father, that I needed to pick up my income a little bit more. So I got an agent, and for the next 15 years or so, did nothing but paperback covers, because they paid the most. Where I was getting like a $3,000 advance to do 16 illustrations in a kid's book, I would get that for one painting. So it was just economics, but it never left me. Children's books, the wanting to share my art with kids, it never ever left. So I ended up doing over 400 book covers.
Whoa.
They were all done in oils. I'd say half were in fantasy paperback covers, and the other half were, it was young adults, it was kids. The crazy uncle who does experiments in the basement, and, it's the funny, goofy stories. But they somehow, I don't know how this happened, but I would always get a lot of these stories about kids going through some type of trauma. I don't know if that came out in my art before then, but I just, somehow the art director kind of connected something. And so I'd get, kids who were misunderstood, had mental problems maybe that they had to deal with. Maybe there was one called The Cartoonist, and but they were all real life stuff. It wasn't made up. I mean, it was a story, but it wasn't like
realistic.
Yeah. Who the attic room was his studio, and he wanted to be a cartoonist, and that was he went up to his studio. Well, his parents were divorced. His father remarried, and stepkids came in, and the father says, "You're going to have to give up your studio because you have 2 new brothers now, and they need the space," and kind of how he dealt with that, But then I got a great opportunity to illustrate the covers of something that I read back in the 60s. I was the cover artist of the Hardy Boys.
Oh, the Hardy Boys. I read a couple of those back in the day.
Yeah.
They still made those?
They did. Well, they chose me to do the covers. They wanted them to be updated, to be, cool and,
Dude, I remember those covers so well.
Yeah, so,
2 boys going on an adventure or something.
They always had no matter where they were, they carried these huge flashlights.
Yes, they're always sneaking around with the flashlights. Yes.
Wherever they were, it could be broad daylight. They had the flashlight on.
Yeah.
So that was, I remember when I got the assignment, and my son was just born, and I had to go up the store to get some milk. And I was riding my bike. It was in the summer, down the middle of the street at night. And I live in the suburbs in Cherry Hill, and it's very, very suburban, but it was very quiet. And all I could hear is like the hum of my wheels of my bike. And I was thinking, God, I get to illustrate the Hardy Boys. It's always everything that you like. It's always about what you liked as a kid.
I know.
You always, even if you don't go and do it, it'll always be a memory, no matter what it is, baseball or ping pong or swimming or reading certain characters. That's what it is. It's all about what you loved as a kid. And, the classic monsters I loved as a kid. Hardy Boys I loved as a kid. So that lasted. I finally got burned out on covers. I remember the day I walked down my studio and I looked at my easel and said, I can't sit down. I could not physically make myself sit down at the easel. It was like something was stopping me. And I went upstairs and I said to my wife, Joy, I said, I can't do this anymore. There's nothing left in me. I just can't. She said, well, you'll have to do something. You have to figure out something. So I started sculpting. I just picked it up. But I really didn't just pick it up, because my mother was a doll maker, and her studio was in our basement. It was converted. It was a finished basement. It was converted into our studio, and she had these long tables, and she would teach dozens and dozens of women how to sculpt their own dolls, how to make the costumes for them. And I would sit, and I remember this, I would sit on the steps, going down, and I would just watch all this stuff being made in different stages. Someone would be sculpting a head. Someone would be sculpting arms and legs. Someone would be making a soft body. Someone else would be patterning a costume, a dress or a costume for the doll. And I guess it just soaked into me, and I didn't realize it. So I started sculpting my own dolls and made quarter scale dolls. And so I would sell those. And then I started sculpting life-size busts of what else? Classic monsters. And I did that for like 10 years.
Sculpting out of...
Well, I'd sculpt it out of like water clay, mud.
Yeah.
Then I'd make a mold out of plaster, two-piece mold out of plaster, and then pour liquid latex into it, let it dwell, let it sit for a while, because the plaster absorbs the water out of the latex. And that's where you get a monster mask from. And then pull it out, paint it, put hair on it, and sell it. And at that same time, I started doing the covers for 5 classic monster magazines. I still only do one. It's classic monsters of the movies. It's a UK magazine. It's just a beautiful magazine, glossy paper, wonderful stories, and then I still do the covers of those. And then, I would go to like horror conventions. One time, if you got time for a story.
Let's hear it,
Sure.
dude.
Yeah.
I was in my studio, and I get an email, and the email said, "Hi, this is Del Toro. This is Guillermo del Toro, and I was wondering if you still have this one painting." So I thought, which one of my friends is being a jerk? First thing, I mean, who is it?
Thought someone was ribbing you?
I thought someone was like pulling the wool over my eyes and just joking. So I know a sculptor who does work for Guillermo, and I said, "Look, I know you can't tell me his email, but is this it?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "He emailed me." So he gave me his number. I called him back, and he said, "Yeah, I was at this. It was I forget what movie they were working on. I think it was Pan's Labyrinth, and he was in an effects studio, and some of the studio guys bought a lot of my monster prints, and they were hanging up on the wall, and he wanted to know if I had the originals." I said, "I'm sorry that they were sold." He said, "Well, how about if I commission you to do 2 of them?" I said, "Okay, fine." So he commissioned 2 pieces and then bought 13 more. And then about a year or 2 after that, I get another call from him. He says, "I want you to do a painting for my movie. It's called Crimson Peak. And I need a life-size portrait, full length, of this very old woman who in the movie she's the prime mover. She's the ghost, but it's the only time you see her in a human form." So I said, "Absolutely." We agreed on a price, and I couldn't paint it in my studio because my studio is my whole basement, and it was only 7 feet tall, and the painting was 7 feet tall. It was 17 feet by 3 feet wide.
Ooh.
3 feet wide.
Wow.
So I did it on canvas up in our den. I had to make like a huge 2x4 easel for it. And he flew me up to Toronto because they have the largest soundstage in North America. That's where they built the interior of this dilapidated manor home, Northern English manor home. The whole set is one set. Instead of like just doing different sets for different things, you were in the house. And so he could shoot in the round. So I went up there and I was sketching poses. He sat me down and he got all these art books and said, "I wanted to have the feel of early 19th century, the portraitures. I got you. And then I designed the Victorian, or the very early Victorian mourning gown, and they made it, and then went back up to Toronto, and we filmed. We photographed the model, this elderly woman, and he chose the picture that he wanted me to paint and sent it down to me in Cherry Hill. So I scaled it up and did the painting, and then took it off the stretcher strips, rolled it up into one of those big white PVC tubes that you get at Home Depot, and then had the caps on them, and then I FedExed that back up to Toronto, where they put it back on stretcher strips, and it was up on the up on the set, and the two, I think it was Eva Green and Jessica Chastain. Was it Eva Green? Yes, I think it was Eva. I'm not sure. They were standing in front of the picture in the movie, and she said, "Oh, that's a great likeness." I said, "Yeah, it looks just like her." She wasn't too happy with. I mean, the woman was not a very nice old woman. She was very mean and nasty. So that was one of those instances that you can't ever count on it happening in your career. Like, you can't manufacture that, but it just has to happen. And that's why I always tell young artists, no matter what you're getting paid, how much you're getting paid for, for this piece or that piece, you always do your best.
Give it your all.
Every single time, because you never know who's going to see it.
Yeah.
So that painting went on a world tour with a lot of his Guillermo's personal collection, his things from the movie and from his collection from Bleak House, and it was really neat because I invited all my family and my friends. We went to see it in a theater, and I was famous for 3 seconds. The 3 seconds that was up on screen.
Yeah.
But it was. I've always wanted to work in movies. Like, I wanted to be a stop motion. I never thought, who uses painters?
Right.
I'm never going to get that chance. So
one of those jobs you don't realize exists, but it's out there.
Yeah. And the only other time that happened was last year. I get a phone call, and I say hello, because it was late at night and I was still in the studio. I've always painted at night, always at night.
Into the wee hours of the morning? Or
four, usually around 4.
Really?
Yeah, I still do it. Yeah.
No distractions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Danny Elfman. I'm calling from Rome. You familiar with Danny Elfman?
The name sounds super familiar.
He did the soundtrack for Pee-wee's Big Adventure and the Batman movie, Nightmare Before Christmas. The lead singer of Simply Red. Oh no,
Oingo
the other
Boingo.
One. Oingo Boingo. I am mistaken. Oingo Boingo. Yeah.
Yeah, one of those names I'm sure I've heard a million times. Sounds
Well,
very familiar.
I mean, the Simpsons theme.
Oh, I've heard that one. Yeah,
maybe. Yeah.
Like all these soundtracks and movies and that. And he said I sell these resin hands of mine as a collectible. He has a thing for hands, and he collects people's like plaster casts of his hands. They're all over his studio.
Okay. Everyone's got their thing.
Yeah, that's cool. And he said, but I've always sold it at concerts in a plain white box. And I want some artwork for it. And I asked around, and to a mutual friend, he said, yeah, use Dan. So he said, I want it to look just like an old 60s Monster magazine ad. So, given that information, I did a sketch, sent it to him. He was in Los Angeles at the time. And he had a photographer take the photo, and, and then send it to me, and I did the painting. But and it went on. It was first sold at the Royal Albert Hall in London. Mm-hmm. So it was really neat. Again, the monster thing follows through. And I could tell you now something that I couldn't say before, is that I have I was hired to do some paintings for the new Universal Dark Universe park that's being built.
Wow.
It's in Florida, and it's all based on classic monsters. The whole place.
I love that park. I love it for that reason.
Yeah. So that was another a huge.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I couldn't,
What about for yourself, brother? Do you have a giant Frankenstein in your house?
I did, but I sold it.
Okay.
Because I always made those life-size Bride and Karloff from the Bride, full costumes and everything.
Wow.
Yeah, but now, as soon as I'm done with things, with doing, I don't sculpt any longer, because I sculpted what I wanted to sculpt. Mm-hmm. And with the classic monsters, I've painted all the ones I wanted to paint. My whole theory about painting classic monsters was I wanted to paint them as if they came off the set and sat down and said, paint my, I very seriously, very thoughtful, usually no, blasting colors, unless a client wants that. But for me, they're just painted as traditionally as I can, and that way I was able to kind of separate myself from some of the other artists who do the more contemporary, loud color, things. So
yeah.
And that brings me up. Don, you had mentioned about doing digital. Mm-hmm. Back in, I think, 96, I started seeing that book covers these artists were doing digital illustration. I thought, what? Digital illustration? What the hell's that? And, me along with everyone else, every other artist at the time saying, oh, they just press a button and the illustration's done, right? Because nobody knew about it. It was brand new. Yeah. But I saw that that's where commercial art was heading. Yeah. So I thought, well, I better train myself in using this.
So you welcomed it.
Oh, absolutely, because I do both. I mean, I work in oils, watercolor, pastel, pen and ink, and digital. It's just another medium, I try as to keep it as close to my oil painting process, so I don't use a lot of layers and stuff, because I just like a simple approach. So, but that leads me to what I'm doing now. During COVID, everything shut down. I was doing Ninja Turtle artwork for NECA, the toy people.
What did you say?
I was doing.
Sam is.
We need a part 2 to this podcast.
Massive Ninja Turtle.
I mean, Michelangelo shaped my entire life, but yes, wow.
And I was chosen because the classic monsters, Ninja Turtle mashup.
Oh, did you take part in that?
I painted all of them.
Shut up! Yeah. I have them in my house. Dude, are you serious?
Yeah.
I'm fanboying too.
Yeah.
I just finished the last one, Shredder as Dracula.
No way, dude.
I just sent it off last week, yeah.
That's you? Bro. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at those and just, thank you, dude.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
Oh, they're so good.
Thank you.
Have you seen these things?
Oh,
man?
yeah.
Oh my God, that's you. Oh man, I'm totally geeking out now.
Well, they were done in oils because the art director wanted to buy the originals to frame and put in their office, all in a row. So they were a lot of fun. And then he gave me the job of doing the Dungeons and Dragons figures, not knowing that I used to do that back in the 80s. You know? But anyway, I'm sorry, but during COVID, everything shut down. Didn't have any work. So it's an opportunity to get back to children's books. And I started writing. And to this day, I've written 12 books. And my first book is launching on Amazon next week that I wrote and illustrated. So that's where the rest of my career, because a friend of mine, Delfino, whenever I tell him, I think I'll retire, he said, okay, yeah, right. He always gives me that sass. And but that's doing the children's books.
What age are you writing for?
Let's see, that would be picture books. So
like 3 to 5.
3 to 5, yeah.
6, yeah.
Some books, emerging readers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I write the stories. What I'm doing is creating. It's going to sound egotistical. I'm creating new folk tales, brand new folk tales. The one that I'm just blocking out now is The Return of Paul Bunyan. Why tell the same story over and over again? What happens if Paul Bunyan comes back? What is his job now? You know, his job back then was to, America was new, and to harness all this wood to build and that. But now, where does he belong? He and Babe, what do? They come back as environmentalists and teach kids about the environment. So you see, I like doing things like that. Every story is an original story.
I want to do a part 2, Don.
The season's going to be a bunch of part 2s.
Part 2, the sequel.
Sorry, I get long-winded.
Wow.
When I talk about art, I can go on for years.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Oh, horror and Ninja Turtles. I mean, we could just have our own podcast one day on those two things. What was it, Raphael's Frankenstein?
Yes, indeed.
Wow.
So
Oh,
good.
my God. Dude, you don't happen to have, like, any sketches you could send me a photo of or anything, do you?
I have some sketches I could send you.
Oh, my God.
You want
my kids,
Okay.
I mean, we're all big nerds.
I'll just email your address, and I'll send you the original sketches.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Don, you're going to have to talk for me. Wow.
Now I feel things have leveled out from me geeking out earlier. So
I know it's over
yeah.
to me now.
Anyway, Daniel, it's been fantastic chatting with you tonight, and a part 2 would be fantastic, especially after your book comes out. Maybe we can talk about that.
If you're willing, man, we would love to have you again.
Yeah,
I'd love to.
Yeah. Thanks again, and yeah, we'll talk soon.
Yeah,
all right.
My
You
pleasure.
got a new fan. Thank you, brother. And
Thanks,
hey,
guys.
no one said anything. Delfino in the
He's
house,
here.
ladies and
Delphina's
gentlemen.
been hanging.
Hey everybody!
Hey.
Hanging out, I'm fly on the wall here.
We love that fly on the wall. All
Thanks,
right, guys, we're
Later.
out.
Bye.
Take care.